The fluorescent lights of Terminal C cast harsh shadows across Marcus Chin's weathered hands as he adjusted the straps of his daughter's backpack. Emma pressed close to his side, her small fingers wrapped around the handle of her rolling suitcase, eyes wide with the excitement that only 80-year-olds could muster for air travel. Marcus wore his airport uniform, the reflective safety vest still clinging to his shoulders from his shift loading baggage on a plane just like the one they would board in 20 minutes. The irony wasn't lost on him. For the past 3 years, he had watched passengers through terminal windows, never imagining he would join them in the cabin above. Emma tugged at his sleeve, her voice bright with anticipation. "Dad, do you think Grandma will have cookies waiting for us like she promised?" Marcus smiled down at his daughter, the genuine warmth in his expression a stark contrast to the exhaustion etched around his eyes. "She always does, sweetheart. Your grandmother has never broken a promise to you." The boarding announcement crackled over the intercom, calling for families with small children. Marcus gathered their modest carry-on bags, checking their economy tickets one final time. The numbers seemed foreign in his hands, a reminder of how different this journey would be from the flights he once commanded. The jet bridge stretched ahead like a tunnel of judgment as Marcus and Emma made their way toward the aircraft. First-class passengers had already settled into their spacious seats, some glancing up with barely concealed disdain as the economy boarding group shuffled past. Victoria Sterling adjusted her silk scarf and whispered loudly to her seatmate, a perfectly manicured finger pointing toward Marcus and Emma. "Look at that poor child, traveling alone with just her father. You could tell he has no idea what he's doing." Her companion nodded with practiced sympathy, both women studying Marcus's uniform with the kind of scrutiny reserved for unwelcome intruders. The baggage handler uniform marked him as clearly as a neon sign, separating him from the business suits and designer handbags surrounding them. Emma clutched her father's hand tighter, sensing the shift in atmosphere, even if she couldn't understand the whispered comments. Marcus kept his eyes forward, his jaw set in a line that spoke of years of swallowed pride and protective silence. Before we continue with Marcus and Emma's journey, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar snap judgments during travel where you're from. The flight attendant checked their boarding passes with professional courtesy, directing them toward the back of the plane where their seats waited among the cramped rows of economy class. The aircraft climbed steadily through the afternoon sky as Marcus helped Emma buckle her seatbelt, his movements gentle and practiced. 2 rows ahead, Victoria Sterling's voice carried easily over the hum of the engines, her tone dripping with manufacturer concern. "It's just so sad, really. These single fathers think they can handle everything, but children need a mother's touch. Look how uncomfortable that little girl looks already." Her traveling companion agreed, with theatrical sympathy. "You can always tell when a man is in over his head. Poor thing probably doesn't even know how to braid her hair properly." Emma's cheeks flushed pink as she recognized herself as the subject of their discussion. She pressed closer to her father's side, her small voice barely a whisper. "Dad, why are those ladies talking about us?" Marcus wrapped his arm around his daughter's shoulders, his voice steady and reassuring despite the tension building in his chest. "Some people make assumptions without knowing the whole story, sweetheart. We know what matters most." The passenger across the aisle joined the chorus of judgment, shaking his head with exaggerated disapproval. Single fathers on airplanes with young children. It's like they're asking for trouble. What happens if there's an emergency? Marcus remained silent, his fingers unconsciously straightening Emma's collar with the precision of someone who had performed countless uniform inspections. Emma pressed her face against the small airplane window, watching the clouds drift past like cotton balls scattered across an endless blue canvas. Her curiosity bubbled over as she turned to her father with the kind of question only children dare to ask. "Dad, how does the pilot know exactly where we're going when everything looks the same up here?" Marcus smiled at his daughter's wonder, his voice taking on the patient tone of someone who had explained such mysteries countless times before. "They use instruments and navigation systems, sweetheart. Radio beacons guide them along invisible highways in the sky, and computers help calculate wind speed and direction for the safest route. The businessman across the aisle rolled his eyes dramatically, muttering loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Great. Now he thinks he's an aviation expert. Probably read that on the internet. Victoria Sterling laughed with cruel amusement. These people always try to sound smarter than they are. I bet he's never even been in a cockpit. Emma looked up at her father with absolute trust, unaware that his detailed explanation had revealed knowledge far beyond what most passengers possessed. Marcus continued answering her questions about altitude, air traffic control, and weather patterns, his responses flowing with the kind of precision that comes from years of first-hand experience rather than casual reading. The flight attendant moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, serving drinks and snacks to passengers. When she reached Marcus and Emma's row, Victoria Sterling's voice cut through the air like a blade, sharp and deliberate. "Excuse me," she called to the flight attendant, her tone dripping with false concern. "I hope you're keeping an eye on that situation back there. People like them shouldn't be traveling without proper supervision. That poor child deserves better care than what her father can obviously provide." The flight attendant paused uncomfortably, glancing between Victoria and Marcus with professional politeness. "All our passengers receive equal attention and care, ma'am." Victoria's companion nodded in agreement, her voice joining the chorus of judgment. "It's just irresponsible, really. Single fathers taking on responsibilities they're clearly not equipped to handle. Look at his uniform, for heaven's sake. He probably spent his last paycheck on these tickets." Marcus's hands tightened slightly on his armrest, the only visible sign of his growing tension. Emma sensed the shift in her father's posture and leaned closer to him, her small voice barely audible above the engine noise. "Dad, are we doing something wrong?" Marcus smoothed her hair with gentle fingers, his voice steady despite the fire building behind his eyes. "We're exactly where we belong, sweetheart. Sometimes people speak without understanding." The first sign of trouble came as a violent shudder that ran through the aircraft like a tremor through solid ground. Passengers gripped their armrests as the plane bucked against unseen turbulence, drinks spilling and overhead compartments rattling with alarming intensity. Then came the scream from 3 rows ahead. An elderly man clutched his chest, his face pale as paper, sweat beading across his forehead in a way that spoke of something far more serious than motion sickness. His wife's panicked voice pierced through the cabin noise as she frantically pressed the call button. "Help us, please. Something's wrong with my husband." The flight attendants rushed forward, their training kicking in as they assessed the situation. One knelt beside the stricken passenger, while another reached for the medical kit, their movements efficient but clearly strained by the severity of the emergency. Marcus instinctively leaned forward, his eyes taking in the man's symptoms with the kind of clinical assessment that comes from years of experience in crisis situations. The pallor, the labored breathing, the way the man's left arm hung limp at his side, all painted a picture Marcus recognized immediately. Emma pressed against the window as the turbulence continued, her father's protective arm holding her secure while his attention remained fixed on the unfolding medical emergency ahead of them. The elderly passenger's condition deteriorated rapidly, his breathing becoming increasingly shallow as his wife sobbed helplessly beside him. The flight attendants exchanged worried glances, their standard first aid training clearly insufficient for what appeared to be a major cardiac event. Marcus watched the scene unfold for another 30 seconds before his conscience overrode his wounded pride. He gently squeezed Emma's hand and stood up, moving toward the front of the plane with quiet determination. "Excuse me," he said to the lead flight attendant, his voice calm but authoritative. "I have medical training. May I assist?" The flight attendant looked up with desperate relief, stepping aside without question. "Please, anything you can do to help." Marcus knelt beside the passenger, his hands moving with practiced efficiency as he checked for pulse and breathing. He loosened the man's collar and tie, positioning him to improve blood flow while speaking in the kind of steady, reassuring tone that had once commanded respect in military field hospitals. "Sir, I'm here to help. Try to stay calm and breathe slowly for me." Victoria Sterling watched from her first-class seat with stunned silence as the baggage handler she had mocked moments earlier took control of the medical emergency with the confidence of someone who clearly knew exactly what he was doing. As Marcus stabilized the cardiac patient with steady hands and reassuring words, a new crisis emerged from the cockpit. The plane's engines began to emit an irregular whining sound that made several passengers look up with growing concern. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, his professional calm barely masking underlying tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some technical difficulties with our navigation systems. We're working to resolve the issue and may need to divert to the nearest airport as a precautionary measure." Marcus's head snapped up from his patient, his trained ear immediately recognizing the specific pitch and rhythm of the engine irregularities. He had heard that exact sound before, years ago, in the cockpit of military aircraft when hydraulic pressure began to fail. The lead flight attendant noticed his sudden alertness and approached quietly. "Is there something wrong? You look concerned." Marcus kept his voice low, not wanting to alarm the other passengers. Those engine sounds, combined with navigation system failures, suggest possible hydraulic issues. The pilots will need to compensate for reduced control authority, especially during approach and landing. The flight attendant's eyes widened with recognition of his expertise. "How do you know all this?" Before Marcus could respond, the plane lurched again, this time with the unmistakable feel of an aircraft fighting against compromised control systems. The cockpit door opened and Captain Rodriguez emerged, his face etched with the kind of controlled concern that veteran pilots wear during genuine emergencies. He scanned the cabin until his eyes landed on Marcus, who was still monitoring the cardiac patient while simultaneously listening to the aircraft's distress systems. The flight attendant approached the captain with urgent whispers. "Sir, this passenger has extensive knowledge of aircraft systems. He correctly identified our hydraulic issues before we even announced them." Captain Rodriguez studied Marcus with new interest, noting the precise way he monitored both the patient and the aircraft's behavior. He approached with the cautious respect one professional shows another. "What's your background, sir?" Marcus looked up, his voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. "Colonel Marcus Chun, retired Air Force. 22 years, flying everything from fighters to transport aircraft. Your hydraulic pressure is dropping in the primary system, and you'll need to switch to manual reversion for landing approach." Recognition flashed across the captain's face like lightning. "Colonel Chun? I know that name. You were the pilot who saved that C-130 in Afghanistan when both engines failed." The transformation in the cabin was immediate and electric. Passengers who had been whispering cruel judgments now watched in stunned silence as their dismissive assumptions crumbled like paper in the wind of truth. Captain Rodriguez straightened to full attention, his right hand moving with military precision to his forehead in a crisp salute that echoed through the cabin like a thunderclap. The gesture carried 20 years of respect for a fellow officer whose heroism had become legend in aviation circles. "Colonel Chun, it would be an honor to have your assistance in the cockpit, sir." The flight attendants followed their captain's lead, each offering respectful nods to the man they now recognized as a decorated war hero. The lead attendant's voice carried genuine reverence as she spoke. "Sir, we had no idea. Please, how can we best support you during this emergency?" Marcus returned the captain's salute with the understated dignity of a true leader, then glanced back at Emma, who watched the entire exchange with wide-eyed amazement. Her father, the baggage handler she knew only as the man who made her breakfast every morning, was being treated like royalty by the airplane's crew. Throughout the cabin, passengers who had spent the flight mocking and dismissing Marcus now sat in mortified silence. Victoria Sterling's face had turned ashen, her earlier cruelty replaced by the dawning horror of recognition. The businessman who had rolled his eyes at Marcus's aviation knowledge now stared at his shoes in shame. The respect in the cabin was palpable, transforming the atmosphere from judgment to admiration in the span of a single salute. Marcus moved into the cockpit with the fluid confidence of someone returning home after a long absence. His hands found the familiar controls as he worked alongside Captain Rodriguez, their communication flowing in the precise language of experienced aviators facing a critical situation. The hydraulic failure required manual control inputs that demanded both strength and finesse. Marcus guided the captain through the emergency procedures, his voice calm and authoritative as they prepared for what would be a challenging landing. Reduce approach speed to 140. Compensate for the crosswind from the northeast, and prepare for a firmer touchdown than usual, Marcus advised, his eyes scanning the instrument panel with practiced efficiency. In the cabin, passengers held their breath as they felt the aircraft respond to expert hands. The elderly cardiac patient, now stable thanks to Marcus's earlier intervention, squeezed his wife's hand as the plane descended smoothly despite its mechanical difficulties. Emma pressed her face to the window, watching the ground grow larger below them, her heart swelling with pride as she realized her father was helping to save everyone on board. The same passengers who had questioned his competence now trusted him with their lives. The landing was textbook perfect, the aircraft touching down with the kind of precision that comes only from years of experience and unshakable skill under pressure. As the aircraft came to a complete stop on the runway, emergency vehicles surrounded them with flashing lights, their crews ready to assist with the medical emergency and mechanical issues. But inside the cabin, a different kind of healing was taking place. Victoria Sterling approached Marcus with tears in her eyes, her voice trembling with genuine remorse. "Colonel Chun, I owe you the deepest apology. My behavior was inexcusable, and I'm ashamed of the assumptions I made about you and your beautiful daughter." Marcus accepted her words with the grace of someone who had learned that forgiveness weighs less than resentment. "We all make judgments sometimes, ma'am. What matters is how we choose to grow from our mistakes." The other passengers formed a respectful line, each offering their own apologies and gratitude. The businessman who had mocked his aviation knowledge shook Marcus's hand with obvious shame. The elderly cardiac patient, now stable and alert, thanked him for saving his life. Captain Rodriguez emerged from the cockpit one final time, addressing the entire cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Chin's expertise today prevented what could have been a tragic outcome. We are all in his debt." Emma slipped her hand in her father's, her voice filled with wonder and pride. "Dad, I always knew you were amazing, but now everyone else knows it too." If this story of hidden heroism moved you, please drop a comment and share your favorite moment, or tell us about a time you discovered someone's hidden talents or background.